please welcome Julian Schnabel. Hello. We have been suitably photographed.
Yeah.
I mean, we've got a lot to talk about because it's been an interesting career, hasn't it?
I don't see it as a career, but I'm unemployed.
Permanently unemployed?
Yeah, absolutely,
Yeah.
unemployable.
Can you employ yourself even?
I employ myself to do something on occasion. Employ myself, anyway.
It's still quite a select kind of club of fine artists and filmmakers. And you're one of
like that.
you're one of the most prolific of them. Was making movies something you always wanted to do, or was it something that came about later on?
I've been a movie fan since I was a little kid, and I think the mics are turned up too loud. So whoever the sound person is, you could just turn it down a little bit. There'll be less of a hello. But a little less. Have you ever seen that Saturday Night Live thing where Chris Walken says, "We need more cowbell"? Anyway, this is maybe better, no? Less cowbell, a little less cowbell. What was your question?
I've forgotten now. No, was making movies something you always wanted to do?
Yeah, I always loved movies, and I was always a movie fan, and I never thought I was going to be a movie director. And I really don't think of myself as a movie director, because there's some people that are movie directors, and that's all they do, and their identity is enmeshed in that, and they're great at it too. But I always loved movies, and when Jean-Michel Basquiat died, there was a Polish filmmaker wanted to make this movie about him, and he came over to the studio, and he sort of had an encyclopedic knowledge of films, and there weren't a lot of movie directors coming over to my studio asking me what I thought about anything. And but I knew quite a bit about Jean-Michel, and I knew him well, and so I thought I'd help this guy do it, and gave him some money so he could do some interviews, introduced him to some Dennis Hopper and some different people who knew Andy and Jean-Michel, and he didn't seem to really listen to what anybody told him, and ultimately I felt like a tourist who was going to make the movie, and so I bought the rights back from him and rewrote the script and directed the movie. I never had a camera, a still camera or a movie picture camera, but because I figured other people could always do that. They could take a picture, and I was just in the present looking at something, and if I wanted to make a painting, that was my way of mediating the world. So I didn't try to reinvent the wheel when I made the film about Basquiat. I just knew my topic.
Yeah.
Gary Oldman played a guy named Albert Milo, who's basically me.
Yes.
And so a lot of those things happened to us. I mean, I was the guy who gave Jean-Michel the $3,000 for the caviar, not Andy. And he did pay me back. And I guess I got to answer answer him in a way, and I survived somehow the 80s and life at that time, and I felt like he felt pretty abused and was pretty unhappy about the respect that he didn't get, and I thought that I could treat him well, and I think that I knew my subject matter. One of the problems with movies is that people don't know their subject matter, and they just, they're, I guess, journeyman filmmakers. They pick a topic and they make a movie, and so it was personal, and basically shot, I think, 90,000 feet, which is very, very little, and treat it like a found object, and then just made whatever movie I could out of the stuff we shot.
Because I mean, what most great filmmakers have in common is, empathy and kind of understanding, and in this case, as an artist. And I believe you were, at that point, the first artist ever to make the film about another artist. And I thought what you said earlier about fearing that a tourist would make the film was interesting. Do you feel that you had a kind of insight that another filmmaker, even a very good filmmaker, would not have done?
Yeah. Isn't there kind of a weird ring to this microphone?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can we fix that? Thanks. It's gonna get better. Hello, 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 hello. Hello, that's better, no? A little lower? A little bit lower now? A little bit lower? Little bit lower? A little bit higher? All right.
It's not quite as tinny now, is it?
Yeah, so, yeah, I mean, it's funny because, did anybody ever see the movie Basquiat? Any people here? Anyway, so the beginning of the movie, René Ricard is saying, everybody wants to get on the Van Gogh boat. There's no trip so horrible that someone won't take it. The idea of the unrecognized genius slaving away in his garret is a deliciously foolish one. We must credit the life of Vincent van Gogh for really sending this myth into orbit. That was something that René Ricard wrote. Anyway, who would have thunk that we would make a movie about Vincent van Gogh? Anyway, Louise is here, Louise Kugelberg, who wrote the script with Jean-Claude Carrier and I, and edited the movie. I guess we did it together, but I mean, without her, it definitely wouldn't look the way it does. You want to stand up for 1 second, maybe? Everybody thinks she's an actress, but she's on the other side of the camera. Anyway.
And on Basquiat, you had an interesting obstacle to work with, in that you couldn't actually depict you couldn't present his own artwork on the screen. Yeah. How did you work around that?
I painted the paintings.
Yeah.
With my friend Greg Bogan. And that was quite easy, in fact. He did all the hard work thinking of paintings like that. Once you're making copies of them, it's not so easy, not so difficult. I mean, I've been around him and seen him work. And so when you see Jeffrey Wright painting in that studio, it looked like that. I mean, I was at Anina Nose's, and so when Jeffrey Wright is painting, if you could hear the sound of what was going on, you'd hear me going, okay, don't look up, pick up that yellow brush, throw it on the floor, walk over that, pick that up, don't look up, drop that, and then you'd hear that. But when you don't hear that, it looked like he was painting, and he did a good job.
Yeah.
But in this film that you haven't, nobody's seen, but you will, Willem Dafoe actually is painting. And I think that's one of the things that Willem really was concerned about, that would be believable. And again, I guess the only person that could make this movie or direct this movie is a painter.
Yeah.
And since I was the only painter available for the job this time, I guess I did it.
I mean, essentially, you actually see a lot of kind of Hollywood
He
films
saw the
about
movie.
painters. I saw the movie.
That gives him a leg up.
And it really is, as you say, a very authentic performance. But you do so often see films about painters where, the actors just kind of dabbling a bit with a paintbrush and they don't really look like they know what they're doing. So, and that's, I guess, another level, kind of just a practical experience that you as an artist bring to that kind of subject matter.
Well, you can't have somebody, I mean, if you have a movie about a basketball player and you can't get the basket in the basket, you got a problem. And I think you really have to know how to hold a brush and what the materials are like, and I mean, all that is, you want to suspend your disbelief, and nobody's acting in the movie. I mean, if there's one thing that doesn't happen in my movies, nobody's acting. something's happening to them. They're reacting to something, but they're not acting. And I've known Willem for almost 35 years, and I don't know what he was doing or who he was channeling when he did that, but I knew that he could do it. He's a very physical actor, and he's a very, very, very sweet man, and very seen him in a lot of different situations, and he's one of those actors that's willing to bring other actors along with him. He's very generous, but you know, there's a scene in the movie. There's an actor called his name is Niels Arestrup. His father was Danish, but he's French. And he was in the Diving Bell and the Butterfly. He was the guy with the white hair who was talking about being locked in this cellar. And he plays a madman in this movie in a bathtub that has a wooden top on it that's sealed with leather straps, and his head's just sticking out of it. And he's talking about Vietnam to Vincent van Gogh. I mean, it was called Tonkin then, but same war. And he said the word sergeant with a French accent, and I said, after the scene, I said, you think you could say the word sergeant again? And he looked at me and he said, you know, I'm like a leaf that's blowing around in the wind. I don't know. No, I don't think I can do that again. I was this leaf blowing around in the wind, and I'd have to try to figure out where I was when I said that. So I said, okay, don't do it. And then he did it anyway and said it for me, but I understood what he meant, and I feel like maybe the whole movie, what we were doing was we were a leaf blowing around in the wind, and it was quite windy over there in Arles, Saint-Remy. The weather was changing. That part of the world is not a friendly place as the weather's changing. And when Gauguin said to Van Gogh, go south, there's not a bunch of yellow sunflowers there when he gets there. It looked kind of like there were dead flowers, and it looked like a concentration camp when he was walking through this field. And you realize that maybe the story that you're going to be told is not the one that you expect to see, but it's told in the first person, so everybody's talking to you. And, or if he's speaking to you as if maybe that painting of him with his head wrapped up with the pipe, he's actually talking to you. And so essentially, the movie is big heads and horizontality is the landscape. So they're landscape and portraits. And it doesn't try to be Van Gogh paintings. And I mean, there's been quite a few movies about him, so one would think, why in the world would anybody make another one? I mean, they're all terrible. So maybe that was a good reason. It's so absurd, we thought, okay, fuck it, we'll try to do that.
And I mean, again, none of the previous ones had been directed by a painter, so you do bring a different perspective to it.
It's very funny because in Maurice Piala's film, Daniel Latour, who's a very fine actor, was going to play Van Gogh, so he started painting, and Maurice Piala went over to his house, and he hated the paintings and didn't give him the job. And he hired Jacques Dutronc, who I think is miserable as Vincent van Gogh. And I mean, I know French people like this Maurice Piala movie, but it's just because it's the anti-biopic or something like that. It had nothing to do with Van Gogh. It could have been called The Horse's Ass or whatever. They could have picked a Cherokee.
And since you say anti-biopic, you've been, I mean, biography is really the realm that you've worked in most of with your filmmaking career. Why is...
But I don't sit, that being said, I mean, I don't think my movies are biopics.
No, they're not.
They're more like portraits. They're portraits. Sometimes they're self-portraits, unintentionally, but I mean, you know, you must, Marty Scorsese makes a movie about gangsters, and maybe he's the surrogate gangster, or if he's the gangster, those are the gangsters he never could be, because he had asthma.
Yeah. And even in Some Night Before Night Falls, which is about a poet rather than a painter, or in Down the Butterfly, which is about a writer, it's all still, focused on artists and artistry, and so I think that.
It's the only thing I really know something about.
Yeah.
I really don't know too much about anything else. So I try to stay with my topic. But I do know something about painting, and I was hoping in this movie about Van Gogh that I could talk about painting and explain. I mean, Joseph Beuys was a great artist, and there's a work that he had where he'd walk around with his dead hair through a museum and explain the art of the dead hair, which I thought was great work. But in a sense, so for example, there's a moment in the film where Vincent's talking to Gauguin, and Gauguin's looking at him and he says, "Why are you painting so fast?" He says, "Paintings have to be painted fast." And Gauguin says, "Think about your surface." He says, you're painting so fast that, and you're changing it before you even see what you've done. He says, "Paintings have to be painted fast. The paintings that I like or that I look at are all painted fast." And then all of a sudden it shows a Frans Hals painting. But it shows the Frans Hals painting very, very, very close up. So it looks quite abstract. And you just see the marks that comprise the head. And as the camera pulls back, you see that it's a portrait of a guy. And then it dissolves into, or cuts to, and it says Goya. And then you see these other flurry of marks, and then as you come back, you realize you're looking at a piece of lace. And then he says Velasquez, and then you see something else that looks like Franz Klein or something really abstract. And then he says Veronese, and you see him walk into this big Veronese painting that's at the Louvre. Delacroix, and then you see him standing in front of Jacob wrestling the angel. The paintings I like are all painted fast, and then Gauguin says to him, as we come back to their scene where they're painting together, "Your paintings look like sculpture. They don't even look like paintings, they look like sculpture." And it cuts to Van Gogh painting outside, and his painting is really thick, and he's looking at it thinking, "My paintings look like sculpture." I mean, but the point is, he never saw a Goya painting. And he never saw Velasquez painting. I mean, there were Goya prints that were in, that he had seen, but there wasn't a Goya painting at the Louvre at that time, or Velasquez. He did see Frans Hals. He did see The Marriage at Cana by Veronese. It happened to be right next to the Delacroix room. And he did go to Saint-Sulpice. But as the author, you can do something like that. What I'm trying to show you is paintings are made of little marks, and they're quite abstract. And you see a face, or you see the eye, but that doesn't mean you're seeing the painting. So breaking it up into this is really trying to understand how Van Gogh's paintings are constructed, and how anybody could look at an old master painting or a contemporary painting. So my impulse is to, and obviously if somebody's an art historian, they can, "What are you talking about? He never saw a Goya painting, he never saw Velasquez, but he liked Millet or Gustave Doré." Well, you know what? Those guys are not very good. They're certainly not as good as Van Gogh, so you need to find somebody that is of the same quality. You can compare Van Gogh to Goya, or Velasquez, or Frans Hals. So it's beautiful to be able to do that. In a movie, you can say that and think, "Oh, I know Van Gogh would say that." But it's an opportunity and a privilege to do that, but obviously I feel like it can be educational also. At one time, there was another person that was going to work with us on the editing, and they said, "Well, you're taking people out of the movie when you go to the Louvre all of a sudden." Hey, that's the story I want to tell it that way, where you see what's going on in his head. So in a film, you can have many parallel lives that are running alongside of each other, and that's the beauty of it. It's a great format and material to work with like that with time.
Yeah.
There are other things in the film also that probably this movie is the most formal and considered to where it's probably the most radical film in a sense where, well, you saw The Diving Bell and the Butterfly? That was told in the first person. This movie, sometimes the movie just goes black, and you just hear Van Gogh talking. So if you all wake up in the morning and your eyes are closed and you're thinking about something that's just like that, and then it comes back, and so there's a kind of Jacob's ladder effect that occurs to where you're watching it, you get taken out of it, you come back, and you're even more focused. And so there's some kind of physical dynamic that occurs, and it might not be the most conventional or the easiest thing to watch, but you walk out of there and you feel altered in some way. And I think that art ought to have that possibility of giving you a cathartic experience that maybe makes you feel, there's a line in the movie where Van Gogh was asked by Dr. Ray, who was this young doctor who was helping Meffrey cut his ear off, and he says, you're confusing people. You're confusing yourself with your paintings. And he says, I am my paintings. And he says, I think I could give people hope and consolation. He says, what do you mean by hope and consolation? And Van Gogh says, well, I'd like people to see the world the way I see it. I could make them feel like they're more alive. And Dr. Ray says, you feel like they don't feel alive? And he says, yes, I do. And you feel like you can make them feel more alive through painting? He says, absolutely. And then he looks for a piece of food that's in his tooth. I guess that's what the movie's about.
I mean, painting is such an individual discipline. It's entirely your vision. It's entirely kind of controlled by you when you're standing in front of that sort of canvas. And filmmaking is obviously an entirely different.
It's a collaboration.
It's a collaboration. You're working with other artists. You're kind of combining your visions. Was that challenging to adapt to when you started making films?
People try to help you, but they don't know that they're not helping you, they're hurting you. Yeah, I'll give you $5 million if you shoot your movie about Cuba in Canada. Or, no, you can't use that lens because it's too radically different from the last lens that you used and it will be jarring. Yeah, that's the effect I would like. But in this particular thing, I'm just talking about Louise's contribution to what we were doing. People see things that you don't see.
Yeah.
So one of the things about Van Gogh is, if you look at his drawings and you look at the landscapes, a lot of them he's very, 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 very far away from society. And you have to be very far away in order to have that perspective. Well, I never walked around a lot in my life. I mean, I just was lazy, basically, or I went surfing or whatever, but she did, and lived in the country. And we just find different places that inform what the movie looked like. And between her perspective and Jean-Claude Carrier, who was 87 years old, and who grew up in Colombier, a small town in south of France, you got all these different perspectives, and I say thank you when people can see something. A lot of directors are so worried that they'll lose control that they stop themselves from, but even actors or, Willem, really, Willem, Oscar, Oscar Isaac, Mads Mikkelsen, those people, everyone. Emmanuel Seigné, Matt Jelmer, everybody brings something there. It's about trust. And if you can ask somebody a question and you actually believe that you believe them, that's one problem that you don't have anymore, because it's really a battle.
Yeah.
You're in a foxhole, you say duck, you don't want somebody to say, what do you mean? You got to duck or you get your head blown off. And it's just not to over dramatize something, but you have a certain amount of time to do it. And you don't want to be, for me, it's got to be spontaneous. So we don't rehearse. And we go out and find locations and adapt. And you get to go home after the scene's done. So that's my theory. My technique is we all jump in a hole with all the equipment, and if we can get out, then we got a movie. If we don't, you're fucked.
And as a visual artist, do you find was it easy to kind of bring your visual imagination to a camera instead of a paintbrush? How did that that complete shift in technique work for you?
Well, I've been looking at the rectangle ever since I can remember, so it's really about things coming from the left, things coming from the right. When we made the diving bell and the butterfly, the great thing about it was the guy can't move his head, so you don't expect to see the people's head at the top of the screen. You don't think that the DP can't move his arms. You just think that, oh, the guy in the movie can't move. So that's why everything looks so strange.
Yeah.
But what an opportunity not to have to tell a story in a conventional way. So obviously, yeah, I like it to be physical, and for the screen itself to have a physical property. So maybe the screen is kind of like a sculpture in a way. When the heads are really big like that, it's kind of like the Lilliputians and Gulliver's Travels. You become then some big heads looking at you as if you were in a jewelry box. You feel it.
Yeah.
It's about scale. So I make paintings that are pretty big, and I like to do it. I like to work at that scale, and yeah.
I'd like to talk a bit about Before Night Falls, which
Sure.
You were talking earlier about films altering their viewers, and that was the case for me. I saw it when I was 17, and it was a very kind of formative. It was my first year of college. It was a very formative film for me, and I still.
I saw Easy Rider when I was 17.
Yeah, and that's.
But that's cool. I'm glad that you did.
Yeah, and I still go back to it often. I want to know how did the story of Reinaldo Armas come to you? Was he someone you had been interested in beforehand, or was this something that came to you? Or?
Well, when I was 15 years old, my parents moved from Brooklyn, New York to Brownsville, Texas, which is right on the Mexican border. So I kind of grew up in an ethnic, Jewish, Italian neighborhood in Brooklyn, and my father was at some kind of a wedding or something, and an uncle said, "You want to go into the ropa usada business," which means used clothes. So before I knew it, I was living alone in our house in Brooklyn, and I had friends. I had a band, but they stole all the musical equipment. And I was there in the house, and then my parents moved down there, and finally I went down there, and so I started living on the Mexican border. Started to surf at that time and started to travel in Mexico. So I started to speak Spanish and be around Mexican people. And from there, and then I traveled around and lived in Spain, and I was also very interested in Cuba. And do we have to stop soon and then have questions, or are we running too long? Is everybody fine? Okay, all right. Okay, so I didn't like Florida that much, and I kind of wanted to go somewhere where I thought, well, Ernest Hemingway went to Cuba. That seemed like a good thing to do. Started going to Cuba. There was a guy named Elmo Hernandez, and he ran the Ludwig Art. There was a foundation, so you could go there legally if you were an artist. I gave a couple of lectures there, but I saw this documentary called Havana, and Ronaldo Arenas was in a hotel room in South Beach, and it was mesmerizing watching this guy talk. He was so unassuming and so funny. And so I knew this woman, a Cuban lady, who gave me that video, kind of a black market video. And then I thought, and then I read Before Night Falls. And I thought, okay, if I ever make another movie, I'd like to do this. And Javier Bardem, first of all, Benicio del Toro was going to play Reinaldo, but he was just starting to get. He was in Basquiat, and he made 2 movies. He won the Independent Spirit Award when he was in that film. But when I was going to make Basquiat, I went to California, and this woman, Joanna Ray, who was the casting person, didn't know that Jean-Michel was black. She knew that he was half Puerto Rican. So she introduces me to Benicio del Toro. I said, this guy's the wrong color. But he was really, really, really interesting, and we became really good friends. I said, if I ever, and I wasn't going to direct the movie either. And so I said, if I'm going to make this movie, you can be Benny Del Mar, which was the guy, a basketball player that he liked. Also, so he was sort of a combination of John Lurie and Vincent Gallo and these guys that were friends with Jean-Michel. And so Benicio and I were very, very good friends, but he was starting to get have a career as an actor. And I don't know if you call it that, but Rick Yorn and Michael Ovitz, I don't know if they wanted him to play a homosexual Cuban poet at that time. They thought he should be in a movie called Way of the Gun, which he did. But he kind of disappeared, and Javier, who was supposed to play Lázaro, I had seen him in Bigas Luna's movie, Jamón Jamón. I thought he was brilliant. I said, either this guy is exactly like that, or he's a genius actor. And it turns out that he is like that, but he's a genius actor also. And so when Benny told me he kind of disappeared, then he wanted to do it, and I said, I already asked Javier if he would do it. So Javier asked if he could just have a 3 months to really perfect his English or get a little bit better at it. And but his mother and his uncle's communist and a movie director, spent time in jail under Franco also. So for an American guy to make a movie about anti-castrista, you better be... So I sent him to Cuba with some of the other actors and locations so they could see what it was like. I said, if you come back and you don't want to do it, I get it. But he came back and he wanted to play Reynaldo, and nobody ever heard of him in the United States. But I was absolutely sure that he could do that. He's a brilliant actor, and I think that was the best performance he ever gave.
I think so.
But it's funny because people don't know what to do with actors. They see somebody do something great, and then they give them a great job with a lot of money, but it's a terrible role.
Yeah.
I mean, when he made that movie with, was it Ridley that made the movie The Counselor? Yeah,
Yes.
terrible. All of these really good actors doing disgusting things, and really lending their identities and their talent to something like that. Big mistake, but they don't know because they think somebody's an artist. They want to support that. They think it's an opportunity. And what happens is the actors always end up in the front line, so you pick on them rather than the directors. And the director always has to take care of the actors. And be responsible for them. The same if I was painting a portrait of somebody, you have to take care of them.
Yeah.
So, we couldn't shoot the movie in Cuba because the film never would have got to the lab. So we rebuilt 200 meters of the Malecón in Veracruz and in Mérida, and it was we worked 18-hour days. But it was absolutely, I loved making that movie. Yeah. Javier was great, Olivier Martinez was great, Hector Babenco had a little cameo in it, but he was down there watching what I was doing, saying, wait, maybe you ought to do it this way. I said, Hector, let me just, I'll direct this one. But he was so sweet, and Dennis Hopper came down there, and Johnny Depp worked for free. So did Sean. Johnny Depp said, just take the money and put it on the screen. Yeah. And Johnny was amazing in that.
He was incredible.
And Johnny Depp is a real gentleman. He's an angel. I don't know what happened to him recently and all this stuff about him, but I gotta tell you, he is, love him. I haven't spoken to him for a couple of years, but he's a great actor, and he could do anything. And he really did, and we did all of the stuff in just a couple of days. But he was working on, I think it was Sleepy Hollow or something, and the guy who was producing said, all he wants to do is play a transvestite in your movie. I said, okay, well he's coming, he's coming. And anyway, he drove down there in a bus, but he was great. He was so great and very funny. Anyway, did I answer any question about that?
You answered many questions about that. And I guess I want to ask because you...
Oh shit. I mean, it was just, my son Vito actually played Ronaldo as a child. That's because Javier cast him.
Mm-hmm.
And then when Javier died in New York City, we shot that in real time and we let the mag run out. So it's like the gay AIDS films, we just let it run out and then shot the next thing. And there's no cuts in that. It's just from one mag to the next. And when he died, I remember just sitting on the couch in my pajamas, and he was in his pajamas. We were just sitting there crying. I felt like Vito died. But it was just so... anyway, we could sit around here and talk about that for hours, but I felt very, very, and when we went to the Oscars and he was nominated for Best Actor, I said, you're not going to win. It's a rigged game, but we did the work.
Yeah.
And that's the prize.
And I mean, that Oscar nomination, which he should have won, but it was still, I think that was a career-changing moment for him. I mean, that...
He did get it later for No Country for Old Men, where he was really crazy and really good, but he was still better in Before Night Falls. But he was great as that maniac in the Coen Brothers movie. I mean, really, he was funny.
He gets good maniac.
Yeah, he was great. He's a great actor. He's a wonderful person, smart too.
The Diving Bell and the Butterfly was a slightly different proposition for you, wasn't it? Because you hadn't worked on that script.
Yeah.
So
that's another Johnny Depp story, because he was supposed to play Jean-Dominique Bauby and said to Stacy Snyder at Universal, if I directed the movie, he'd do it. And then what happened is he ended up making the pirate movies, and they wanted me to convince him to do it, but I didn't do that because it wasn't what our friendship was based on. But I wanted him to do it in French anyway, and I don't think they understood that. And so then Kathy Kennedy wanted Eric Bana to play Jean-Dominique Bauby, and we met him at the Four Seasons. But I said, there's a French actor named Mathieu Amalric, and I think he should do this. And she never heard of him, but after she made Munich, he was in that movie, and she said, I met this French guy. His name's Mathieu Amalric. That's a great idea. Why don't we get him? Which we did. And Ronald Harwood wrote that script, and it was pretty good. But I rewrote that script and changed it, but he didn't want to share the credit, which is okay. But it was a great possibility. I mean, the idea of so it was, I had written a script to The Perfume by Patrick Susskind that was never used. Wow. And I figured if Grenouille could smell, I thought he could smell all the way to Africa. Yeah. So I figured if he could do that, then Jean-Dominique Bauby could imagine that he could go to Africa or Spain or wherever. So that's where all this stuff comes in, where you see him talking about his imagination and he's surfing, or he sees a guy, he's skiing, or the ice shelf collapsing. That's not in the book, The Diving Bell and the Butterfly. But I don't know why I was thinking that the ice shelf was sort of a metaphor for his body. Is this my phone? So I got this footage from National Geographic, and I was playing it. It was on a video, and I was listening to Bach, the Goldberg Variations, and I was watching this. I listened to two music cues. One was "This Place Is Empty Without You" by Keith Richards, and the other was the Bach Goldberg Variations with Glenn Gould playing. And I was trying to decide what should be on these glaciers going into the Alaskan Sea. It's not my phone. And what happened as you went to the end, the video goes backwards. So I was watching this, and all of a sudden, the glaciers are coming out of the water and going back onto and reforming themselves. And I thought, okay, that is the raison d'être of the film. I understand what to do, and so I thought to have that collapsing and hear this guy saying, "Had I been blind and deaf, or did it take the harsh light of disaster for me to find my true nature?" I thought, fuck, that's good. So Ron Harwood got, I think, a BAFTA for that,
He did, yes.
But he wouldn't have got it if I didn't change the script around a little bit. But anyway, I loved making the movie, and it was a great opportunity.
Yeah. Were you aware of Bobby's story beforehand? Or?
In fact, there's a scene in a bullfighting arena, that's in Nîmes. I was sitting next to him, in front of him, at that particular bullfight. Thought it would be an interesting anecdote when we'd have this conversation today. Is that it? Do we want to have some questions? I don't know, maybe, what's the timetable in here? Somebody in charge? 15 minutes left? Okay, fine. I think you should ask some questions if you want.
Let's have some questions.
How's that sound? Is that okay?
Sounds great.
Okay.
Yes, please.
Thank you. Hello.
Hello.
You explained that your movies are not biopics, more portraits or even self-portraits. So to which extent Basquiat, which basically is one of my favorite movies ever made, to which extent Basquiat is a self-portrait, and to which extent Van Gogh is self-portrait?
Okay, well, the Van Gogh movie is more of a self-portrait than the Basquiat movie. I happen to be in the Basquiat movie as Albert Milo, but when I say it's not a biography, I mean, you select something that's a fragment of somebody's life, and so it doesn't include everything. It just is a little slice out of that. It was my experience that I had with Jean-Michel, so I was speaking from what I knew about him. And even if some of those things happened, I think that all films are reality and irreality blended together. I mean, I was talking with my friend Louis the other day, and he was saying, I was just thinking about time, the way time functions in movies, and there's a painting there that says JMB 88 on it, a painting that I painted. And Jean-Michel or Jeffrey Wright is looking at the painting, and Albert Milo says, "Yeah, I painted this for a friend of mine who died." But obviously I painted the painting after he died, and so he's looking at a painting that is made for him after he died. And maybe I was thinking about Accattone by Pasolini, where he sees his own funeral cortege. The reason you know that he's watching his own funerals because he's dreaming, and you just hear him breathing as that's going on. But I think, I don't know what it is, but I think that there's a kind of a collapse in time in the movies that I make, where even in Before Night Falls, when he's in prison and he's talking about, "I never wrote so much," and people think of a logical way to shoot these people in jail. But for me, when Ronaldo said people would send little balls of soap with messages, we called it the mail, and there's a moment where you just have hands and there's all of these little balls of soap that are swinging back and forth. And it just looked like some kind of a kinetic sculpture or something. It didn't look real. It looked, I think Joseph von Sternberg, when he was asked about his movies, when he says, but this doesn't look real at all. And he said, of course not, it's much better than that. So I think you can put things that might have happened, things that never happened, things that you wish happened. So in that sense, I mean, I hate to repeat myself, but I have to sometimes. But Van Gogh said something that I think is true of what we're doing and what our movie was. And he said, how to achieve anomalies, inaccuracies, and refashionings of reality to where what you get is lies, but lies that are more truthful than literal fact. So when Van Gogh was painting at a certain moment, he said, my paintings, the color in my paintings doesn't come from reality, it comes from my palette. So if you are going to get involved in a medium, you have to let the medium speak through you, and it just can't be used as an illustration of some preconceived idea that you have. Another question?
More questions? Yes.
I can try to speak loud, but
Yeah,
just a second.
We can get you a mic.
Hi, I love your films. I like your paintings. I have a question. It's often the relationship here in this last hour between your painting and films has been discussed. But you said also you watched films when you were very young. And I was curious, before you ever made a film, do you think that filmic impulses, whether it's a question of handling time or scale, had an effect on your painting when you began? Not like in a graphic, but...
Sure, yes, absolutely. I mean, one of the movies that had the biggest effect on me was The Ten Commandments. And what I really, really liked is when the Red Sea opened up. I thought, how'd they do that? I mean, all those people in those chariots going through and then the waves came back and closed on top of all of them. That was an impressive thing to see. And I think that made a huge impact. I mean, the idea of scale also. And also, I mean, I've been surfing since I was 15. I've surfed in some pretty big waves and spent a lot of time under the water also. I mean, not scuba diving. I'm talking about being held under the water. And it's terrifying and it's also fascinating. And that image always stuck with me. Another film I really liked was Spartacus. Then later, I must have been, I don't know if I was 15 or 12 or whatever, but I was walking Avenue M. There was, I don't know if it was the Midwood Theater or whatever, but they were playing Repulsion by Roman Polanski. There were no film clubs in Brooklyn. I mean, at that time, in Mexico, they showed French movies and there were real film clubs. But in Brooklyn, at that moment in time, was some kind of sui generis miracle that movie was playing in that theater. I saw that and I thought, well, that's another way to make a movie. That's something to think. And also there was a short that played in front of that. I don't know who made it. I asked Roman Polanski this question. He didn't know. But a guy is fishing. And you just see him fishing for a while, and he's fishing, and then he eats his sandwich, and then he starts walking along the beach, and you think, what the hell is this about? And he's walking, and he finds something, he looks at a candy wrapper, and there's nothing in it, and he kind of looks around for it, and then he sees a brown paper bag on the beach, and he finds a sandwich in it, and he pulls it out and takes a bite out of the sandwich, and a hook comes through his cheek, and he gets pulled into the water. I thought that was pretty cool. Also, when I was about 7, I don't know, my mother took me to the Met, and I saw Rembrandt's painting of Aristotle contemplating the bust of Homer. And it was behind a velvet rope, and it was all gold and shimmering, and light was all around it. I thought, well, that seemed like a good thing to do. I was drawn to that. So somewhere between that experience and seeing the Red Sea part, I was born.
I think we have time for one more question, yes.
I was very surprised to hear that you once wrote a script for The Perfume, which is one of my favorite books of all times. But as far as I remember, Patrick Süskind never wanted to give away the rights to that book. So why would you do that? What's the story behind that? That's very interesting.
It's quite a good story. He sold it for a lot of money to Bernd Eichinger. Bernd Eichinger's dead now. They knew each other. They shared a girlfriend. And that's why Bernd said Patrick sold it to him, besides the fact that he gave him $10 million. Anyway, I met somebody somewhere who put up some of the money and started talking to me about this book. And then he came to my house in New York, and he said, would you like to do this? And I said, I know that book. I know that book pretty well. And because he looked at my house, and I think he thought it looked kind of like the purple salon in the movie. I mean, in the book. And so I went to Munich to meet Bernd Eichinger, and in an Italian restaurant, and he hid his glass with a spoon, and the waiter came out and gave me a script concept. I thought, hey, I've got it. I'm going to make this movie. And that was right before September 11th. And then I thought Caroline Thompson could write the script, and she started to do that. He was very rude to her. And that didn't work. And then some time went by, and he was using this to meet all these different directors, Ridley Scott, Marty Scorsese, a lot of different people. And I took him to Al Pacino's house one day, thinking that might impress him, and that Al was could play Baldini. Anyway, then I didn't hear from him, and all of a sudden he showed up again a couple of years later. I said, if I write the script, I direct the movie. How much do you want? I don't care. What do you offer the last guy? $300,000. Okay, I'll take $300,000. I wrote the script in a couple of weeks with a guy named Carl Lund. And then he buried it and made this movie with Tom Tickver, which was terrible.
Yeah.
Terrible. What a waste of time. Okay, anyway, he's dead now. They made that movie. I wrote a script that was absolutely great. And Johnny was going to be Granui, and Chris Walken was going to be Tired Epinas, and Javier Bardem was going to be Chenier, and Al was going to be Baldini, and it was going to be all roses and great. It never happened. But that being said, the man, Robert Kulzer, who works for Constantine Films, spoke to my agent. I don't really need an agent, but I have one, in California at CAA, and said, if I would make this movie about Van Gogh, I could get the rights back to Perfume. But I still didn't want to make a movie about Van Gogh, and that was a few years back, and somehow I really didn't want to make a movie about Vincent Van Gogh. But one day, Jean-Claude Carry and I started talking, and we thought it was impossible, so we'll do it. But now, it's conceivable that we could get I could get the script back. I don't know. You want to do
Well, Hollywood's all about remakes at the moment, so.
Yeah, well, I'm not interested in Hollywood too much, but that's part of the story. But even more of the story, if you want to know more, there was a moment where he was having a really, I know we have to go, but no more questions, I'm going to answer this one. A really hard time, they're having a really hard time, so Harvey Weinstein was going to put up the money and give him, I don't know, $5 million or something like that, and we were going to get to do it. Bernd Eichinger checked himself into a mental hospital. It's true. Checked himself into a mental hospital so he wouldn't be able to sign legally any papers. And he stayed in there long enough till the offer went away. True story. Anyway, that's the story of the perfume, and that's a movie in itself.
I was just going to say, I wish we had another couple of hours to talk about many more stories, but thank you all for coming tonight.
Thank you very, very much.